to All About Agatha, the podcast all about Agatha Christie, in which we read and rank all 66 of Dame Agatha Christie's mystery novels. This week, we are tackling The Secret of Chimneys. This was actually Dame Agatha's final book to be published via The Bodley Head in June 1925 and in the U.S. later the same year. And it is another one of her, we could call it a thriller or an adventure story, but this is not a mystery puzzle. So this is another one that has a rather twisty-turny plot, and we are going to do a longer version of a synopsis compared to what we usually do with the mystery puzzles and comment throughout. So let's dive right in.
Our book opens much like certain elements of The Man in the Brown Suit in what was at the time Southern Rhodesia, where we meet Anthony Cade, who's lean, tanned, very handsome. He's working as a tour guide very close to Victoria Falls, and he hates his job. Guiding around, he calls them a bunch of old sheep, I think, which is, pleasant. But he happens to run into his old friend, Jimmy McGrath, who we learn Anthony first met, quote-unquote, all trussed up, ready for the cooking pot. In other words, he was going to be eaten by cannibals, and Anthony potted, quote-unquote, a few of them, i.e. he killed them, freed Jimmy McGrath, and then they ran off.
And Anthony is quite proud of the fact that he shot those
He's telling his sheep this as a very exciting story.
So over drinks, Jimmy offers Anthony a job to relieve him of his dreaded tour guiding. Basically, while in Paris, Jimmy helped out an old man that he saw being roughed up on the street. And this old man turned out to be Count Stilptich, a renowned statesman from the very made-up Balkan country of Slovakia.
Yep.
Take a little Herzegovina, take a little Czechoslovakia, and you get Slovakia. Stilptich also mentioned to Jimmy at the time that he knew where the Koh-i-Noor was, and that is a famous British crown jewel kept in the Tower of London. And that's kind of an odd thing to say since it's a famous British crown jewel kept in the Tower of London. Doesn't everyone know where the Koh-i-Noor is? So that's kind of perhaps we're stretching a little bit to call it a clue, but this is a bit of a clue that Christie drops in the story, where an astute reader is going to realize that there just may be a chance that that diamond everyone thinks is still sitting in the Tower of London, in fact, was stolen and a replica put in its place. It is going to be our first of two MacGuffins that are driving this adventure plot. The second of those two MacGuffins is a man known as King Victor. And Stilptich, who was rather drunk and apparently quite chatty when Jimmy McGrath helped him out, says that King Victor was behind the gang of men who were attacking him. And Jimmy has no idea who King Victor is, but Anthony tells him that King Victor is the most notorious jewel thief in the world. We
should also mention that there's another clue within this conversation, and it has to do going back to Slovakia and Stilptich himself, insofar as Anthony basically immediately knows who Jimmy is talking about and knows far more about Slovakia than I think Jimmy anticipates.
Yeah, he also looks up very sharply when Jimmy casually mentions Slovakia. And it seems to be, the country seems to have some sort of significance to Anthony. I'll admit I did not pick up on that on my first reading, but when I was looking back over it, I did see that is absolutely layered in there, that there's some significance to Slovakia in Anthony's reaction, and we can't really account for it yet. So
right.
Good to keep in mind. The astute reader will keep that in mind, and it will pay some pretty handsome dividends by the end of this story.
But as we're talking about, King Victor is the most notorious jewel thief in all the land. We can say he's the colonel in The Man in the Brown Suit, down to, in fact, the diamond thieving.
Absolutely. Or Mr. Brown in The Secret Adversary. I mean, Agatha Christie, so far she's 3 for 3 in these thrillers as to having some shadowy, unknown male figure that goes by a certain title, and figuring out the identity of that person being one of the MacGuffins that's driving the plot. So this is yet another one of those. Stilptich, he dies soon after that attack in Paris. Before he does, he sends a manuscript of his memoirs to Jimmy McGrath with the stipulation that if Jimmy delivers them safely to a publisher in London, he'll get £1,000. Jimmy, though, has adventures in Africa that he would prefer to attend to, so the offer that he's offering Anthony is to deliver the manuscript in his stead for a cut of £250 out of the £1,000. And Anthony happily accepts, but then Jimmy has one more favor, which is that in yet another instance of saving a complete stranger, Jimmy
what a
McGrath
good
seems
Samaritan.
to be just the greatest Samaritan. He once saved and this is his word, a quote dago from drowning, and this man gave him a bunch of letters he'd been keeping for purposes of blackmail, and the letters seemed to be from a married British lady named Virginia Rebel, who was carrying on an affair. Jimmy, of course, is a proper gentleman, and he has no intention of blackmailing this woman. But he doesn't want to just destroy them, since then the lady won't know that she is no longer under threat. He also can't mail them to her because he's not even sure where she lives. The only name he has to go on is an estate called Chimneys, which is mentioned as the address on one of the letters. And Anthony, once again, is a font of information and informs Jimmy that Chimneys is this grand British estate where significant political matters often occur. So Anthony promises to return the letters to this Virginia Revel as well, and he embarks on a ship to travel to England.
Again, as was mentioned earlier, this is the second book in a row with quite a bit of interest in Africa, and clearly influenced by her 1922 trip around the world. And
we basically start in the same area where
of
the Man in the Brown Suit took place. Yeah, so.
And also a similarly handsome tan men. It's an important element. And
there's a lot of mentions of how handsomely tanned Anthony Cade is. I mean, Agatha Christie really, really liked a nice tan face.
Well, I mean, I suppose she was used to.
But who doesn't?
Well, who doesn't? And I suppose she was just dreading going back to, dreary, rainy England and
right,
pastiness.
The land of pasty men. Yes,
right.
Yes, I don't blame her.
We have all kinds of interesting geopolitics going on just in the build-up of this, right? I mean, the talk about the Balkans, we find out that Czechoslovakia isn't even supposedly a very important country because Stiltich, is far more important than the country himself. He is important throughout the Balkans, I believe. It's odd that she actually names countries in Africa, and yet she sort of randomly makes up this country in the Balkans, a hodgepodge.
Yeah, it's a weird mixture of real countries and then made up countries, and there doesn't seem to be much of a rhyme or reason for that. But
right, but it's. I think it's in both cases it's setting it up so that these seem to be proper British gentlemen who just happen to be sort of involved on the peripheries of these international or colonial adventures.
Yeah, I mean, right away we're sort of given this, and this will come to bear when we get to the end of the episode when we do our rankings and we're talking about ways in which this book is stuck in its own time, because boy is this one stuck in its own time. And just right from the get-go, I think Jimmy and Anthony are set up as these proper, upright British gentlemen against, not only Czechoslovakians, but, sort of ridiculous Czechoslovakians like Count Stiltich, Dagos who blackmail upstanding ladies, and then African cannibals and other indigenous peoples who, Anthony is perfectly happy bragging about shooting. It's just sort of from the get-go, there's the othering in this book is intense, and that does not let up, because even though immediately after this we go back to England, we go to England and we stay there are a lot of foreign elements swirling around this tale, and that sense of otherness certainly does not go away.
I would say it's amped up even from Man in the Brown Suit. Man in the Brown Suit acquits itself a little bit in a number of ways. I mean, obviously we talked about some of the more problematic things in it, but it goes out of its way in a few places to try to at least ameliorate that, where this does not at all.
Yeah, I think Man in the Brown Suit has a bit more of the travelogue kind of charm to it. So there's even though you could, I don't know if it's splitting hairs, but you could certainly say, well, are they being the right kind of travelers, et cetera, et cetera? They're still being
tourists,
travelers who are wide-eyed and taking in with wonder and delight everything around them, and that goes a long way to taking the edge off of that sense of British versus non-British, othering of everyone else around them that you totally feel in this book. I agree with that.
Right. So back in jolly old England, we meet Lord Caterham, who is the 9th Marquis of Caterham and owner of Chimneys, the glorious British estate where matters of political import take place and apparently named for its many, many, many chimneys. It was very important for political gatherings under the previous Marquis, but the current Lord Caterham is not very interested. He just kind of wants to be left alone in his giant house.
Yeah, he's kind of, he spends a lot of his time whining, and at times his whining is actually amusing and he can be amusing, but at other times his whining is really tiresome. He reminded me a little bit of Mr. Woodhouse and Emma in exactly that way. Mm-hmm. I think that Jane Austen intended Mr. Woodhouse to, and there are many people in Emma that actually are extremely tiresome to read. I'm also thinking of Miss Bates, and she certainly meant it that way, but I got the same sort of effect from him. They're both the main characteristic of both of those people being that they're utterly useless. So there's this politician, speaking of tiresome, there's a politician named George Lomax who forces a shooting party on Lord Caterham for the coming weekend at Chimneys for purposes of securing Czechoslovakian oil concessions to a British syndicate. So Czechoslovakia isn't a very important country, except that they've just discovered oil, and the Brits want to be in on the oil and sink their teeth into it before the Americans or anyone else can.
Makes sense.
Attending the party will be Prince Michael of Czechoslovakia, who is the current heir to the throne if the monarchy ever gets reinstalled. And basically we learn that there had been an insurrection when the previous king married a French actress and then made her his queen rather than arranging a morganatic marriage, which is a marriage when a royal marries a commoner and their children do not inherit. He actually just made her a full-on queen, pretended as if she had royal blood. But apparently the masses in Czechoslovakia... I think he
pretends that she's a Romanov, right? Of some kind?
Yeah, he does. They pretend she's a Romanov, and they're like, no, I'm pretty sure that she was like doing the can at Le Moulin Rouge the other day.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the Czechoslovakians are having none of it, and there's a massive insurrection, and it is said that they kill the king and queen.
Right.
Which is why Prince Michael now is the current heir. So,
the heir in exile, right? Because they've installed essentially a temporary republic.
Sure, some sort of a more democratic-leaning government, but no one really thinks that that's going to last.
Well, right. I mean, we have like an Oliver Cromwell situation possibly going on here. Apparently, the British also don't think this is going to last, because otherwise there would be no point in having Prince Michael to this elaborate weekend at Chimney.
So one of the other people who's going to be at Chimneys is Herman Isaacstein, who is a British financier in charge of this British oil interest. And while George Lomax is talking to Lord Caterham, he also mentions the issue of Stilptich's memoir, because that could cause some problems in that it may contain tales of past scandals that will upset the political order, thus upsetting this whole oil deal. So Lomax is very much aware that the manuscript is on its way from Africa to London, and they plan to intercept Jimmy when he arrives and invite him to Chimneys as well and coax him into giving them the manuscript. Should he require some extra super-duper coaxing, George Lomax also suggests that they invite his cousin, Virginia Revel, does that name sound familiar? Who had some past dealings with Czechoslovakia herself through her deceased husband, and is a sort of charming feminine influence that is a very good coaxer. Lord Caterham is also a fan of Mrs. Revel's, and he agrees to invite her. And this is where I'll make my first kind of critique, my first of many critiques of this story, because spoiler alert, this is not my favorite Agatha Christie novel. It feels as if we've been reading prelude and prologue up to this point. We haven't even gotten to Chimneys yet, and we're at like page 50 or something. There's an awful lot of telling in this story, and there's an awful lot of complicated backstory, and it's just it's just not tightly told. Let's at least put it that way. This is a point in the story when I started getting a little worried as I was reading the novel.
And I would say that I think that there are cases in which you could draw out this introduction. If we really get to know Anthony, for example, in the first 50 pages, I would actually be more or less okay with the slow build to them getting to Chimneys.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we're 50 pages in here, and none of the characters are particularly fleshed out at this point either.
None of them are fleshed out, and this is where I think it's also, this is why I'm so glad that we're doing this whole thing the way we are, because I think it's very helpful to be reading this book right after The Man in the Brown Suit, because in so many ways this is a less good version of The Man in the Brown Suit. And right. I think the easiest difference to point to is that The Man in the Brown Suit is from the first person, mainly Anne Bedingfeld, but then also those diary entries from Sir Eustace. And the voices pop off of the page, the characters are there, and it's diverting immediately, and it's engaging, and it's delightful. And we just don't get that here. We have third person, and it's actually a rather omniscient third person. It keeps on jumping from character to character. We have... we begin from Anthony's point of view, but then we almost kind of, within scenes even, jump to other people's points of view, such as Jimmy. We jump to Lord Ketteram's point of view. I don't know if we ever really jump to George Lomax's point of view, but we certainly will jump to Virginia Revel's point of view as we get further into the story, and on, and we'll talk more about that. But it's it's jarring, and it doesn't allow any of those characters to get as sort of effortlessly fleshed out and engaging as they do in The Man in the Brown Suit.
Right, and this is almost the opposite problem of what I just said, that if you can focus on character, you can wait a little bit on the plot. You can also do a little bit of omniscient narration and alternating viewpoints, so long as the plot is propelling those forward. And we don't really...
But we're getting neither.
Right. And right.
Yeah. And speaking, I don't know why I did not expect to be referencing Jane Austen multiple times, but Jane Austen is an extremely omniscient narrator. Right. But she doesn't tend to go inside multiple people's heads. You don't get that jarring element, but what you get is a narrator who is as far above her characters as almost God, so she can sometimes just tidily sum up what's happening, or make a comment about it in a way that moves it forward. You get plenty
of that in most of the great 19th century novels. You have that as a narrative device.
Absolutely.
So it's not any kind of criticism here of omniscient narrators.
A third person omniscient narrator. No, it's just...
It just does not particularly... It's disjointed in this.
Yeah.
And what it does is, because there's no focal point, your attention is sort of just diffused everywhere, and that's what makes it, I think, a little bit hard to feel invested in it. And 50 pages in is a little bit long to feel not invested in something.
Totally agree. Well, let's get to Chimneys. Anthony arrives in London, and he sets up at this hotel where there's an Italian waiter named Giuseppe who steals the letters that this Virginia Revel wrote. He steals the bundle of letters that Anthony has in his suitcase in the middle of the night. And Anthony assumes that he was intending to steal the memoir, Stulptage's memoir, but we aren't sure. And this was where I was convinced that this was going to be a nice little misdirect from Christie, in that we'd find out that Giuseppe actually did mean to steal the letters after all, and there was something, specific about the significance of the letters, but no, he actually did
mean to steal
them by accident. Yeah, and he meant to steal the memoir. So, and we know that because of what happens next. And next is that we do get introduced to Virginia Revel. These early thrillers of Agatha Christie do tend to have that pert, vivacious young woman in them, and she is definitely the one in this book. Maybe because I was already feeling a little displeased with the way things were going in this book, I didn't fall in love with her the way that I totally did with Anne Bedingfeld, and pretty much did with Tuppence in The Secret Adversary. She's very beautiful. She's described as, she was tall and of an exquisite slimness. Indeed, a poem might have been written to her slimness. It was so exquisitely proportioned.
Yeah, I mean,
that's nice.
It's very nice. It doesn't really do anything for me on a character level, but that's fine.
Right.
So she's visited by a man who happens to be our friend who stole the wrong item from Anthony's room.
Giuseppe.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And he has brought one of the letters he accidentally stole. And he's blackmailing her because her name is on the letters. And the only problem here is that she didn't write the letters. They're not in her handwriting. She didn't write the letters
because we're now inside of her head, since we're skipping around inside of everyone's head. So we know that she thinks to herself, well, this is weird because I definitely didn't write these letters. They're not even in my handwriting. But she basically allows herself to be blackmailed just for the heck of it because it's a new experience. And I think we're supposed to find that incredibly charming. And she gives the man 40 pounds and tells him to come back the next day. And then, much to her surprise, when the next day comes, she returns from a game of tennis, only to realize that someone sent a fake telegram to her servants sending them into the country. And then when she goes into her study, Giuseppe, the blackmailer from the day before, is sitting dead in a chair from a gun. He's dead from a gunshot. So the man who just blackmailed her the day before is now dead in her house, which does not look great for her.
Also, the man who she let blackmail her for no reason.
For no reason, yeah. So she's realizing what a tight bind she's in. And luckily for her, this is when Anthony Cade has chosen to look up the aforementioned Virginia Revel of the letters that he just had accidentally stolen. And he appears on her doorstep dressed up as a soldier selling poems, which I picked up on as a callback to Agatha Christie. Obviously was very touched by those memories of soldiers from World War I going door to door trying to sell poems, which, again, I don't blame her because that sounds like the most depressing thing ever. And they kind of joke about that. And she's like, oh, please don't be one of those soldiers selling poems. I just bought one this morning, I promise. And he laughs, and they're immediately attracted to each other. She notes, despite his appearance, how attractive he is, his lean, tanned face and whatnot.
And of course, it's enough for her to just confess everything to him. A stranger.
She just confesses everything to him. Yeah, which was also a little... She's set up as this saucy, resourceful, intelligent, feisty woman, but she certainly leans on this strange man rather quickly here.
And then he very chivalrously doesn't even apparently flinch at the fact that there's a dead guy in this lady's rooms, and he just rolls on in and searches dead guy's pockets and finds a scrap of paper that says Chimneys, 11:45 Thursday. It is Thursday.
And it is Thursday.
And Virginia conveniently is on her way to Chimneys. And so he surmises that someone must not want her to go to Chimneys. So he tells her to go there.
Right.
And then he becomes an accomplice.
Disposes of the body.
Yeah, he disposes of the body, and
he becomes an accessory after the fact.
Yes, he does, and also disposes of the gun.
And this was actually I did enjoy this. So the disposing of the body is pretty ho hum, but he climbs a tree that's incredibly difficult to climb, and then ties the gun to a branch, figuring that everyone always looks for guns in lakes and rivers and on the ground, but no one ever thinks to look up in trees, which is true. Respect, Anthony Cade. I thought that was actually enjoyably clever.
I mean, although he could have just dumped it in a dumpster someplace far away from the potty also.
True, but it was picturesque and fun. I'm trying to take my bits of enjoyment from the story where I can, Catherine.
Oh, okay? Well, you do you. I will just continue. I'll continue to be incredulous that he climbed a tree and put all this effort into this ridiculous act. But okay.
Okay, so after that, Anthony gets to Chimneys exactly at 11:45, and he hears a shot that he believes comes from inside the house, although no one else wakes up, even though he's hearing it from outside. I guess it didn't wake up anyone inside, which is really weird and never explained. Anyway, he leaves, and as he does, a light comes on in one of the first floor windows, but then it goes out after a minute. So the next day, we are informed from the point of view of yet another character, who is this local inspector and his constable, that there was a murder at Chimneys. And the man murdered was, in fact, Prince Michael, the heir to Czechoslovakia, who was found dead of a gunshot in the council room, which is just this kind of meeting room, I suppose, in a stately meeting room in Chimneys. And there's no gun, but his watch was smashed when he fell, and it reads 11:45, so that matches up with what Anthony saw. And there are footsteps leading into and out of the room. Well, there are footsteps leading up to the room and then away from the room on the outside from a French door. And George Lomax, the politician who had organized this whole party, brings in a Superintendent Battle from Scotland Yard, and this is a police inspector who is known for his discretion. Battle is a quiet man above all else, but we're definitely supposed to think of him as a brilliant detective and one to be respected. Battle asks who is next in line for the Czechoslovakian throne, and we're told that there's this first cousin of Prince Michael, a Prince Nicholas, who went to Oxford, had more democratic ideals, then disappeared for a while in Africa, or may not have turned up more recently in America. No one really knows where he is at the moment. So, ding, 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 if you have a mysterious missing royal personage in an Agatha Christie novel, especially an Agatha Christie thriller, that person's showing up at some point.
Gee, I wonder what sounds familiar, where we last heard of two young men who went to Oxbridge, who disappeared into Africa, and one may have come from extreme wealth. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah, but was that potentially in the very last novel that we read?
Gee,
Yes.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Anthony Cade himself barges on in to hearing about this murder. And, of course, he should be the prime suspect because he was lurking about Chimneys. And, the footsteps are probably his. So he just, confesses everything to Battle. I mean, minus the disposing of the body.
Right, minus anything that would in any way incriminate Virginia Revel with the body found in her house and disposing of the body and whatnot. Anthony also learns from Bundle, who is Lord Caterham's oldest daughter, a.k.a. Lady Eileen, a.k.a. the second woman after Virginia Revel to fall in love with Anthony Cade in this story. She is bowled over by his handsomeness and charm immediately upon meeting him. She tells him that the window that lit up on the night of the murder, Anthony sort of specifies which one it was, and she says that it belongs to a Mademoiselle Brunn, who is the governess of Bundle's two younger sisters, Dulcie and Daisy.
Mademoiselle Brunn. So Anthony asks about her references and learns that they came by letter, not in person, from a French noblewoman. So they have taken her word for it, and, the French governess seems to be very respectable. Virginia admits her face looks a little bit familiar, which I guess isn't all that curious since apparently they know the lady who referenced her.
Right, Virginia knows the French noblewoman who wrote the reference, so Virginia assumes that she's seen the governess around when she's visited the French noblewoman at her estates, and she totally admits that she doesn't even really look the lower classes directly in the eye or give them much sort of direct attention. And that's actually a rare example in the story of othering by class.
Right.
Usually it's more by race or nationality, but it's a very throwaway, meant to be charming and just sort of whimsical and careless.
Although it is a little bit of
modern audiences.
It is a little bit of Christie's sort of constant warning underlying a lot of these is hey, maybe don't underestimate the servants.
Yeah, that's true.
Regardless of that, Anthony, for whatever reason, is allowed to leave Chimneys by Battle. But he's allowed to...
Well, because Battle is such a good detective that he just realizes by instinct that Anthony, of course, is innocent.
Right.
Based on no evidence or clues or deductions or anything, which, again, is why the mystery puzzles are so much more enjoyable.
Right. So he goes to France to look up this noble lady.
And I guess we should say, this whole business of Virginia assuming that that's how she knows the governess should be suspicious to a reader, both for what you were saying, Catherine, as to don't underestimate the help. Whenever there's anything involving the help, it often is a significant point in these books. But the very astute reader will also remember that Virginia Revel had dealings with Czechoslovakia through her late husband. So perhaps she saw that perhaps the governess actually has something to do with Czechoslovakia. At this point, there should just be a bit of a red flag thrown up around the governess.
And so while Kate is off in France, Virginia awakens Bill Eversley, who's the private secretary to George Lomax, and who was also in love with Virginia because, of course. Mm-hmm. And she can hear people rooting around in the console room. And it's the middle of the night, so they go down to investigate and build hustles with the potential burglar, but the burglar escapes, and apparently it's too dark to see who the burglar is. And Virginia isn't even sure if it was just one person in the room. But while they're running out into the night, they run into the American millionaire Hiram Fish, who's fully clothed.
Yeah, so this American millionaire who's also staying in the house that weekend is fully clothed, which is suspicious. And then also suspicious is that Herman Isaacstein, the British financier, has not appeared. So he seems to have slept through the whole thing, even though it created quite a noise. So that's just little bits of suspicion thrown on those two people who are staying there for the weekend. Perhaps they're caught up in this whole mess. Anthony comes back, having gotten nothing out of the trip to France.
And then, also after this convenient trip, he realizes that, he was actually in a different location on the lawn when the light went out. And actually, maybe it was not the governess's room after all.
Right, maybe it was actually the American millionaire Hiram Fish's room. So that's yet another piece of suspicion. And then the next night, a group of them essentially stake out the council room, figuring that the burglar is going to revisit the room. And they are, in fact, right. And they capture this burglar, who turns out to be Inspector Lemoine of the Sûreté in Paris, which is their it's like their Scotland Yard, right?
Right. So he's trying to track down King Victor, the international diamond
thief.
Yeah. We get a lengthy backstory about how the king and queen of Czechoslovakia, who were killed in the insurrection, stayed at Chimneys 7 years ago. And it turns out that the queen was actually in league with King Victor, the jewel thief, and both Battle.
So not only was she a French actress, but she was a jewel thief.
Right.
She was a real bad one.
Did we just read a book in which a French dancer turned out to also be a jewel thief? just bringing it up. Battle and Lemoine are convinced she actually was the one who stole the Koh-i-Noor and replaced it with a fake, I guess. And that's actually what is in the Tower of London. But because she and the king, not King Victor, to be clear, but the king of Czechoslovakia, were killed immediately after that, she didn't actually get the stone out of Chimneys at all, and so somewhere hiding in Chimneys is in fact one of the most valuable diamonds in the world.
Right, but we also do learn in the course of this lengthy backstory plopped in here later in the novel that the king and queen's bodies were both mutilated beyond recognition when they were killed. That is a huge red flag in that that means it's quite possible that one or both of them weren't actually killed.
So one of them may still be alive.
A super astute reader might think back to Mademoiselle Brun, the whole, maybe she has something to do with Czechoslovakia. Could she potentially be this former French actress pretending right now to be a French governess who had been the former queen of Czechoslovakia, hiding out and waiting for her moment to seize the jewel? We shall find out. We also learned that the letters written by quote-unquote Virginia Revel were actually written by this queen, this French actress turned queen, which she was sending to and from King Victor. So they were actually speaking in code about jewel thieving and whatnot.
Right.
And there may be a clue as to where the jewel is hiding in the letters, or potentially even in Stilptich's memoir, since he was also staying at Chimneys that weekend that the Koh-i-Noor was stolen. So very conveniently, after hearing all this whole story, Anthony Cade goes back to his bedroom and he finds the letters that had been stolen from him intact, just waiting for him in his room. And he has no idea why, but he immediately gives them to Inspector Battle. And Battle calls in a cipher expert to decode them. And the cipher expert tells him that Stilptich double-crossed King Victor and the Queen the weekend that they stole the diamond. Essentially what he did is that he stole the diamond from them and put it in a new hiding place. And in this letter that the expert decoded, there's a further reference to a memorandum of Stilptich's that reads, Richmond 7 straight, 8 left, 3 right. And this was the part of the story where I got angry. We're told that this letter has been decrypted, and then we're told what the decryption is, and we're never in any way given the ability to decode it ourselves have any sort of an active.
You wanted your Bletchley Park scene?
I'll take Da Vinci Code.
Ooh.
I mean, I just what I wanted was what Christie provides for us in the mystery puzzles, which is why the mystery puzzles are so much more satisfying, because the readers can take an active role. And again, if these thrillers aren't working on a character or a tonal, or at least a tonal level, if they're not diverting us in some way, the passivity of the storytelling just begins to grate. And this is where I think that she was trying to like snap it forward here. So I guess so. Well, let's do that as well. Let's snap it forward. Get to
Anthony Anthony very conveniently asks Bundle, "Are there perhaps any secret passageways in this house?" Which, of course, that would be the logical leap, particularly in the council room. And she says, "Well, of course." And so she,
well, of course there is.
So she shows them one of the secret passageways. They count 7 paces, then 8 bricks to the left, 3 bricks to the right, and underneath that brick, there's a card of small pearl buttons, a square of coarse knitting, and a piece of paper with a row of capital E's on it.
All of the items on this card do contain rows, ROWS, and so perhaps the card is referring to a rose of some sort.
Yes.
More on that later. Apparently, Count Stiltich had a sense of humor, and he was basically treating his ferreting away of this diamond like a treasure hunt, because they still haven't found the diamond, and they're very frustrated. Meanwhile, Boris, who we haven't mentioned, Boris is the old servant of the murdered Prince Michael, and he has inexplicably attached himself to Anthony Cade now that his old master is dead. And Boris hands Anthony a scrap of paper he says he picked up from the, quote, foreign gentleman.
Although Boris himself is foreign.
Although Boris himself is foreign, and Anthony thinks that he meant Lemoine, the French inspector, but then when he shows Lemoine the paper, the French inspector says he's never seen it before. Virginia says, well, maybe it's Herman Isaacstein, since he looks foreign, because essentially he's Jewish, which is, we haven't even gotten there, but what read today as rather anti-Semitic references to Herman Isaacstein's Jewishness are just peppered throughout this book. So this is just one of many examples.
It's pleasant.
What's really frustrating is that Anthony could just ask Boris who he meant, but he doesn't, and that's a little bit of a mystery, I suppose. And, as is Boris even transferring his allegiance from Prince Michael to Anthony. And this is another one of those don't underestimate the servant moments in Christie, where it's like, why would he do that? Did he perhaps have an instinct about Anthony and a way in which Anthony Cade may actually be someone similar to the Czechoslovakian royal who Boris was already working for? We don't know. So the address on the paper is Hurstmere, Langley Road, Dover. It's this address in Dover. Anthony goes down to Dover, where he spies on a group of criminals talking to each other very obviously and conveniently, and ultimately I found very unconvincingly, about how they're finally going to meet King Victor. Then he hears someone moaning upstairs, climbs through a window, sees this emaciated guy lying in a bed. It's like, am I in 7 now? What's happening? And then he turns and sees Hiram Fish, the American millionaire, with a gun trained on him.
Right.
Back to Chimneys.
Everyone notices that Anthony and Fish are gone, and Virginia guesses that Fish has kidnapped him, but then, in fact, Lemoine informs her that Fish is a Pinkerton, and so that's a thing.
So we basically have Scotland
British,
French, and American representatives
yes.
of detective work.
Correct. And then Lemoine, basically tells everybody that Anthony is King Victor, and even Virginia's like, yeah, that sounds totally possible. Yet Boris comes to her because I guess she can be trusted, even though she's suspicious of Anthony. Boris comes to her to help Anthony, and she goes with Boris.
Yeah, I mean, he basically throws a bunch of pebbles at her window, has a note from Anthony saying, I need your help, and she decides to go leave with Boris. Cut to the final scene of this story, in which Anthony Cade gathers the entire cast of characters back at Chimneys in the council room, like any good amateur detective would do, to reveal all. And reveal he does. First, he makes up this fake solution to the Stiltich riddle about Richmond 7 straight, 8 left, 3 right. saying that the diamond is in the library. And one of the assembled party takes the bait, sending a secret message to his accomplice inside the house. This accomplice turns out to be Mademoiselle Brunn, who tries to find the diamond in the library while they're all still sitting in the council room. But Boris, the faithful servant, attacks Mademoiselle Brunn, who is carrying a pistol with her at the time, and she is accidentally shot dead in the process. So he has avenged the death of his former master, Prince Michael. And Mademoiselle Brunn was, in fact, the former queen of Czechoslovakia, the French actress queen. So she is now finally dead.
There was a Mademoiselle Brunn.
There was an actual Mademoiselle Brunn who did work for that French noblewoman, but she was intercepted, and the fake Mademoiselle Brunn, the queen, was set up in her place.
Also intercepted?
Anthony, sure.
Also intercepted?
Yes. Also, while we're on the topic of interception, Anthony then reveals that Inspector Lemoine from Paris is not actually Lemoine. The real Lemoine was the emaciated man in the house in Dover, and it was the exact same method of intercepting him. And then King Victor came to Chimneys,
posing,
impersonating him, posing as Lemoine. So King Victor has been caught, and Anthony then goes through the real clue by which Stulptich's memorandum can be used to find the diamond, which is via a rose bush outside, and they take whatever steps they need to from the rose bush. At this point, who cares? They find the diamond buried in the ground. And then final reveal, Anthony Cade is Prince Nicholas, the first cousin to Prince Michael. So he's going to be a king, and guess who's going to be a queen? Virginia Revel, who he married the day before when she left to help him.
Can we think of another recent novel that we perhaps read wherein a young lady is proposed marriage, and then only for it to turn out that her suitor is actually like an incredibly wealthy heir?
Could it be the man in the brown suit? Could it be this? And this will this will dovetail into the issue that we already touched on in that book, in The Man in the Brown Suit. At the end, when Anne Bedingfeld kind of relates that decision to go live on this island together and renounce all of their wealth, and it's such a charming character moment capping the whole story, and it's like tonally in keeping with the slightly surreal and ridiculous adventures that they've been having, and it all works. And it's effortless to read, and it could not be further from the way I felt by the end of the story, where I was just exhausted. I was exhausted by all of Anthony Cade's reveals. I did not care about him. I did not care about Virginia Revel. I want them to go far, far away in Czechoslovakia, and actually I don't care if the Czechoslovakian populace ends up killing them. They think probably they won't, since Virginia Revel is, after all, descended from British nobility. But whatever. The plotting was just so all over the place. To me, it felt like a mess.
I thought it felt incredibly derivative of a better book. And that was thing number one that bothered me. And thing number two is, we can talk about how I don't know that you connect with the characters a lot of times in the puzzle mysteries. I mean, that can be used as a criticism. Yeah. And that's, the thing is, it's okay because it's just generally not how they function particularly. And so when we have those kind of character comments in something like Mysterious Affair at Styles, it's like a little problematic that a lot of the characters are a little cardboardy, but it's so tightly wound as a plot that is like the fun of it. That's the game of it. That's the crossword puzzle of it.
And it's that tension that we were talking about in the very first episode when we talked about that Joan Eccocello point of saying that there's a push and pull between characterization and plotting, which I still don't totally buy, because I still think you can point to perhaps not any of the stories that we've read thus far, but ones that we'll get to where there is superior plotting and superior characterization. Right. And those, I think, are the most beloved Christies for that reason. Right. It's just, up till now, we seem to have fallen on one end of that spectrum, either superior plotting in styles, and to a certain extent in The Murder on the Links, or superior characterization and tone setting, just the other elements of story other than plot in Secret Adversary and certainly in The Man in the Brown Suit. And to me, this is one that feels like it fails on both.
I mean, I just didn't like it. I just don't think it's very good.
I think this is a perfect time to move on to the adaptations. So they're actually, just really quick, there was, interestingly, a theatrical adaptation of this novel that Christie wrote herself in 1931, and she just called it Chimneys, but it was never produced. And it lay totally dormant and forgotten until December in 2001, when this theater director in Calgary, in Canada, found the play by accident. He asked Agatha Christie's grandson, Matthew Pritchard, about it. And even Matthew Pritchard had never read it. But they basically rediscovered it. And in 2003, the play was put on in Calgary. It was the world premiere. And since then, it's been put up in both the UK and the US in the mid-aughts. From what I could tell, I couldn't find anything about the actual plot of the story, but apparently the murderers changed in the play.
Well,
Christie actually changed the murder.
That then lends itself to another transition to the television adaptation,
Yep.
which was made into a Miss Marple episode. And it was during the second series of Miss Marple adaptations, which was on ITV instead of the originals, which were on BBC. And I think this was from 2010. Yeah, so they mash the vague plot of The Secret of Chimneys into a Miss Marple episode. Miss Marple, it's hard to find in any analog that she's actually playing in this. Superintendent Battle is in this, played as a character named Inspector Finch. He has all the same characteristics, really, as Battle.
He does, yeah, he does.
And he's also played by the incredibly delightful Stephen Delane, who Game of Thrones fans would know as Stannis Baratheon, and who has been in, the third adaptation of The Bridge, The Tunnel, that's been airing. I think it aired on PBS in the US this year. And, I think that what you can say about the adaptation, which, I don't even know I don't even know the extent to which to get into it, because it bears so little resemblance to the plot, other than the house and the diamond.
Right, it's like there's a house and there's a diamond, but everything else is pretty much different. And that was pretty much the way that second Miss Marple series, how they treated a lot of the source material. I think the point was to use it as inspiration and a jumping off point, because they knew they had that first more faithful series, and we'll talk about that when we get to our first Marple in a little bit.
I think to the credit of anybody who wants to watch the adaptation, it makes more sense than the book version. It has that going for it. It has a few good performances. It has...
Yeah, I guess it does. It doesn't have... It's not as... what the Secret of Chimneys was trying to do was to be as madcap and charming as the man in the brown suit, and they dispense with that effort.
They make it into a country house mystery instead of a madcap thriller.
But I have no problem with that, because the madcap
doesn't work
adventure tone was never actually achieved in the original, so that's fine. Yeah, they set it in 1955 as opposed to the mid-20s, and Lord Caterham actually ends up being the murderer. So plot mechanics. To me, it's a big fail. We've talked about how the plotting of this just doesn't really seem to work. I would give it a 3 or even a 2. I would give it a 2.
As I told you before we started recording this, I actually got to the end of it and was like, oh, I don't think my reading comprehension has been so good this week, because I'm not entirely sure everything that happened here.
Not sure what I just read.
Not sure what I just read. So, I'm happy to leave it with a 2, because yeesh. So when we're going to talk about plot credibility, it's a thriller, so, we have a pretty low bar. Everything is pretty coincidental. Jimmy running into the Count in Paris and also running into the guy with the letters. That's just...
Right, those are two completely fundamentally separate different events, and there's sort of this baseline fundamental coincidence that starts the entire story that is really just a coincidence, and never in any way are those two elements brought together. That's an issue.
Right, and even having all the letters come together at the same time as this deal when Prince Michael's going to be at Chimney, all of these elements, the timing is so coincidental.
It is, but a lot of that is thrillers too. This is the one, I think, one of the few categories where I think it actually did slightly better than The Secret Adversary. I just think in The Secret Adversary, that was her first one of these, and I think she hadn't gotten as good at least hiding the coincidences a little bit better, or fashioning them in such a way that they weren't as glaringly obvious. You do have to think about it a little bit in this plot, and it does fall apart in terms of credibility, but I don't think it quite as easily as Sacred Adversary.
Right.
So
I guess a 4 or 5 is fine.
Let's do a 5.
Okay, being generous.
Let's do a 5. I'm being generous. So series-long characters, definitely Superintendent Battle. He'll appear again. Mm-hmm. He is one of the better drawn characters, but that's really saying almost nothing in this story. He stands out a bit. I do think we're supposed to assume his intelligence a bit more than we are actually showed his intelligence, as we are showed Poirot's intelligence, certainly, by the way he deduces from clues, and we'll get to Miss Marple. So it would have been nice if there had been a little bit more of that. He was fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fine.
5?
Yeah.
5 out of 10?
5 sounds fine. Okay. Just like Battle. Single book characters, as we said before, we got so many of them. The kind of point of view and even the omniscient narration of them is so sort of haphazard that it's hard to really glom on to any of them. I mean, the best one of them is Anthony Cade. And, I mean, he is a character, I guess. The one thing that I will say, to be slightly fair to this, is that actually the writing of it, not anything structural or the plot itself or the characterization, but the actual writing is not terrible in this. And he has, like, some decent dialogue.
Wait, when you mean writing, do you mean dialogue, or what do you mean?
I mean the crafting of an individual sentence versus the writing of...
Like on a micro scale.
Yeah, it's actually some of it's pretty good. You know, it's
and to be fair to Christie, it's always good. Like, that's the thing that I think people who don't give her due assume that she is a worse writer than she is, and she's an elegant writer. I mean, the sentences always flow and they always fit together. There might be some of these more macro global issues, but she knows how to slap sentences together and make paragraphs work.
Yeah, and I think there are some nice ones. I think there are some nice ones in this, and that's the nicest compliment I can give to this book. So, but he has pretty good dialogue, and so he's not a bad character. It's just I don't really none of the other characters do anything for me in this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I will say the description of Battle, by the way, he's described as a squarely built middle-aged man with a face so singularly devoid of expression as to be quite remarkable. I appreciated.
I like that.
That was pretty good.
No, I like that too. So setting
a 5.
Oh,
maybe
right.
A 5.
Yeah.
What do you think? A 5?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or
sure.
Okay, let's give him a 5. Okay, so setting and tone, I also thought was not great. Again, we talked about how the tone doesn't get established the way it did, certainly in The Man in the Brown Suit just before this one, and even in The Secret Adversary. And there's just one moment I want to bring out, because it's not, I'm bringing it out critically, but I was also kind of delighted by Christie's chutzpah in this. And it's when we get to Chimneys, and she says, descriptions of that historic place can be found in any guidebook. And then she just goes on as to all the different ways that people can view Chimneys as members of the public, and writes, in view of all these facilities, to describe Chimneys would be superfluous. So she's basically just like, yeah, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to. So let's just move on, shall we? And like, it's just really funny that she's just sort of like, pass. I kind of got the feeling that she wrote this book a bit quickly. I think it's just, it was a breezy write, even though it's not a breezy read. That's my guess. I mean, we'll never know, but
yeah,
it felt that way.
It did feel that way. All right, so what are we giving
My
that?
thing is that I think that she did not do as good of a job in setting and tone as she did in her other thrillers, but that she still did a better job, certainly, than she did in Styles and probably even The Murder on the Link. So I think about a 6 would work.
Okay.
Do you think that's too high?
I think it's too high, but I mean,
we could do a 5. We could maybe a 5.
Okay.
A 5 is feeling like the right number for
yeah, it is feeling like that.
Okay, and then real quick, because there are a lot of them, and we're not going to go through all of them, but we've gotten to the stuck in its time portion of this novel, and we mentioned that there are a lot of these moments. There's a lot of othering of people who aren't members of British nobility, essentially, and in particular, there's a lot of nonsense about Herman Isaacstein and his Jewishness.
Yeah. There's like a hook-nose references.
There's lots of hook-nose references. There's a reference to Hebraic people, yellow-faced financiers in city offices. There's this whole running joke where Lord Caterham can't pronounce Herman Isaacstein. So he keeps on saying like Eikestein and different things to bundle, and it's supposed to be delightfully funny, and it obviously does not seem that way to a modern reader. There's also there's this one baron who is like an underling in Czechoslovakia, and she gives him the exact cadence of Yoda whenever he has any lines, and it's actually really funny. Just like a couple of them are, His Highness Prince Michael, who the support of the British government has. Of many secrets he the knowledge had. Europe into war plunged may be. And my lips sealed are. The apple cart upset will be. There's a hysterical joke about Anthony Cade marrying a black woman toward the end. And also just the whole thing about Boris, the servant to Prince Michael, and his animal instinct reminded me of that whole business with the servant in The Man in the Brown Suit who was compared to a dog. He's very much compared to a dog as well. And it's that idea that he had this animal instinct for Anthony Cade actually being a Czechoslovakian prince. And that's where the sort of patronizing element of Christie's Don't Underestimate the Help. It's like, don't underestimate the help because they have the instincts of animals.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, that's what it means. It doesn't always mean that specifically. We want it to mean don't underestimate servants because they're actually intelligent and
well, it does mean that a lot of the time.
Human beings.
This just happens.
It does, but it doesn't mean it here.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't mean it here. So,
all right.
So this is one where it's pervasive. It's everywhere. Like it's just there's a lot of it. I would say deducting at least 6 makes sense.
I would go 5 or 6. Some of these have been bad in different ways.
Let's do 6, because I just feel like with The Man in the Brown Suit, we took off 5, and to me this feels like a tick worse.
All right.
Than The Man in the Brown Suit. So our overall ranking is 2 + 5 + 5 + 5 + 5 - 6 = 16, putting The Secret of Chimneys in dead last by 5 points.
That seems about right.
That feels right to me. This was clearly not our favorite, but we will live to see another day.
We will, and we hopefully we can pray. So, for those of you who made it through this week's episode and are joining us next week, we will be doing yet another Poirot short story. Thankfully,
yay!
And it will be The Mystery of Hunter's Lodge, and then
the week after that, we are going to be tackling The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Very excited for that.
Very exciting. In the interim, please follow us on Twitter at AllAboutTheDame and on Instagram also at AllAboutTheDame. And if you would like to email us, we are available at allaboutthedame@gmail.com.
Fantastic. All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Have you made the switch to Knix? Millions of women have made the switch to the revolutionary period underwear from Knix. That's Knix. Period panties from Knix are like no other, making them the #1 leak-proof underwear brand in North America. They're comfy, stylish, and absorbent, perfect for period protection from your lightest to your heaviest days. They look, feel, and machine wash just like regular underwear, but feature incognito protection that has you covered. You can shop sizes from extra small to 4XL. Choose from all kinds of colors, prints, and different styles, from bikinis to boy shorts, thongs to high-rise. You've got to try Knix. See why millions are ditching disposable, wasteful period products and have switched to Knix. Go to knix.com and get 15% off with promo code TRY15. That's knix.com, promo code TRY15 for 15% off life-changing period underwear. That's knix.com.